Good to have you with us at this hour. I'm Daniel Che here to provide you with the latest. Our starting point today, Hangzhou, China, where world leaders have gathered to discuss ways to bring about inclusive economic growth through innovation. South Korean President Park Geunhye laid out Seoul's vision for building a future growth engine through creative economy. Song Ji-sun gives us a review of the opening day.
At this year's G20 Summit aimed at building a more innovative, invigorated, interconnected, and inclusive world economy, President Park Geunhye proposed Korea's creative economy drive as a new model for growth to counter the so-called new normal of low growth now prevailing around the globe.
창의적 아이디어에 ICT를 비롯한 새로운 기술을 융합하고 기술과 혁신, 문화를 융합해서 새로운 시장과 일자리를 만드는 것이 한국 창조 경제의 핵심입니다. 창조 경제는 아이디어만 있으면 누구나 성공할 수 있는 기회가 있기 때문에 G20이 추구하는 포용적 성장과도 궤를 같이 합니다.
But also emphasized Seoul's three-year economic innovation plan aimed at revamping labor, finance, education, and the public sector through reform, inviting G20 members to pursue structural reforms for growth.
구조개혁에서의 어려움을 극복할 수 있는 모범 관행을 만들고 실패 사례도 공유해서 타산지석으로 삼을 것을 제안합니다. 나비는 누에고치 속에 번데기 시절을 겪고 그 껍질을 뚫고 나오는 과정을 통해 날개가 힘을 얻어서 화려하게 날아오를 수 있습니다. 만약 나비가 나오기 쉽게 껍질을 뚫어주면 며칠 살지 못한다고 합니다.
At Monday's session, but will call for action from G20 members to promote free trade against rising protectionism, a message she's expected to stick with through this three-nation multilateral diplomacy trip. President Park Geunhye is also set for bilateral talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping on Monday, where the two sides are likely to discuss regional economic and security issues, including North Korea's nuclear threats and the deployment of THAAD missile defense system in South Korea. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News, Hangzhou.
High on the agenda on the first day of the G20 Summit was how to bring back growth to the global economy. Hwang Ji tells us more about what was on the discussion table.
The two-day G20 summit kicked off on Sunday as the leaders of the world's biggest economies and the heads of international organizations like the UN and IMF came together in the picturesque Chinese city of Hangzhou. It's China's first time hosting the G20, and the country is determined to use the event to showcase its emergence as a global power. This year's theme is toward an innovative, invigorated, interconnected, and inclusive world economy. While last year's summit in Turkey focused on counterterrorism, this gathering is taking a different angle, especially in light of the UK's decision to leave the European Union and the risks that poses to the world economy.
Leaders from across the world discussed issues centering on the economy, like the global low-growth trend and increased financial volatility.
The first of 5 sessions was held on Sunday, with talks to continue on Monday on how to revive the currently anemic world trade volume. Also on the agenda will be global climate change. Before wrapping up, the world leaders will adopt a global communique. The G20 was formed in 1999 after the Asian financial crisis increased the need for world economies to work together. It's made up of the world's 19 economies plus EU, representing 85% of world GDP. Hwang Ji, Arirang News, Hangzhou.
While in Hangzhou, President Park Geunhye has officially appointed 3 new members of her cabinet and a Supreme Court justice. The president's former secretary for political affairs and a former gender equality minister, Cho Yun-seon, will now officially take the post of Minister for Culture, Sports and Tourism. Opposition parties have objected to Cho's appointment, citing an alleged lack of transparency in her income and for ethical reasons, but Parliament's approval is not legally required for the president to make an appointment. President Park's new agriculture minister will be Kim Jae-soo, her environment minister, Cho Kyung-gyu, and new on the Supreme Council will be Kim Jae-hyung. Moving on to another story, Korea's political parties are set to lay out their policy visions starting on Monday in speeches by the leaders of the three major parties. Ruling Saenuri Party leader Lee Jung-hyun will speak in Parliament on Monday, focusing on policy reforms. The newly elected head of the Minju Party of Korea, Cho Yun-seon, will give a speech the next day, and Park Geunhye of the People's Party's turn comes on Wednesday. The opposition parties are expected to bring up that issue and the corruption scandal involving senior presidential secretary for civil affairs, Woo Byung-woo. A South Korean law designed to promote human rights in North Korea took effect on Sunday. The bill, which was held up in Parliament for 11 years, calls for Seoul's Unification Ministry to set up a foundation, a center, and to hold other projects that will focus on supporting North Korean defectors and resolving issues over families separated by the Korean War. The Unification Ministry expects the law to systemize projects to improve human rights in North Korea that have been conducted in all different ways by various civic groups. The South Korean government has announced some initial measures to cope with the demise of Hanjin, the country's once biggest shipping company. 9 government ministries met on Sunday to discuss further countermeasures. Yoo In-shin reports.
Officials from 9 government ministries met Sunday morning to try and assess the damage stemming from the collapse of Hanjin Shipping and come up with measures to limit its impact. They looked at the potential harm the sudden demise of the world's 7th largest shipping company could do to domestic and overseas businesses.
At this moment, what's of utmost importance is to ensure the safe arrival and unloading of all the shipments now underway. We're going to try our best and work with government agencies to minimize the damage. And for that, we also need Hanjin and other shipping and logistics companies to cooperate to the best of their ability.
The country's financial authorities are set to provide one-on-one counseling to businesses affected by delays among Hanjin's cargo vessels. For its part, the Korea Customs Service has announced it'll work in emergency mode around the clock and simplify clearance for cargo ships. Also at Korea's ports, the lay time for loading and unloading goods will be extended to as long as a year. To make up for the tonnage lost with Hanjin, Korea's second biggest shipper, Hyundai Merchant Marine, plans to add 4 ships on its routes to the U.S. and 9 on routes to Europe starting this coming week. Meanwhile, the Foreign Affairs and Trade Ministry will do what it can to ensure the protection of Hanjin's vessels in 43 countries around the world, where it filed for a prohibition against seizure. However, some Hanjin customers and company officials have voiced concerns whether the measures are enough, with demand set to peak ahead of the holiday retail season. Yoo In-shin, Arirang News.
Korean automakers saw their lowest sales in 7 years last month. According to the Korea Automobile Manufacturers Association, global sales of domestically produced vehicles in August came to about 251,000, the lowest since August 2009. That's just 65% of last year's average monthly sales of 380,000. The decline was attributed to labor strikes at Hyundai, Kia, and GM Korea, as well as special consumption tax cuts on new vehicle purchases that came to an end back in June. In several British cities, to protest against the country's decision to leave the European Union, some demonstrations were held on Saturday. Some 2,000 people turned out in London, while there were also demonstrations in Edinburgh and Birmingham. Prime Minister Teresa May has shown strong support for Brexit and is reportedly working on plans for the UK's future outside the EU. But after receiving a petition with over 4 million signatures for a second EU referendum, she's set to meet with members of parliament to discuss the matter. The petition was submitted before the vote and demanded another referendum if less than 60% voted for Brexit and if voter turnout was less than 75. The vote in June met both those conditions. Scientists in Singapore have found that the Zika virus behind the outbreak in the city probably did not come from Brazil, but from a local strain already in Southeast Asia. Singapore's Ministry of Health said on Saturday that researchers sequenced the DNA of the Zika virus found in 2 local patients, and the results showed it was not from Brazil, but likely evolved from a strain that's been in the region for decades. Experts welcomed the news as it could mean most locals are immune to the strain. What's more, the genetic distance from the Brazilian version would dramatically lower the risk of brain defects in infants believed to be caused by the virus. The Vatican on Sunday made the late Mother Teresa a saint in the Catholic Church. The canonization mass led by Pope Francis was held in St. Peter's Square with an audience of some 100,000 people. The Sisters of the Charity, a religious community, provided bus rides to the venue and pizza to some 1,500 homeless people in the spirit of the saint of the slums. Over in Calcutta, India, where Mother Teresa spent much of her ministry, ceremonies were scheduled at the Missionaries of Charity, a Catholic order founded by the late nun. She died in 1997 at age 87 and was beatified in 2003. It often takes decades to reach sainthood, but Mother Teresa's beatification was rushed through by Pope John Paul II, and Pope Francis vowed to complete the process. Indirect effects of Typhoon Namtaeun will be felt in certain parts of the nation, with rain expected in Daegu and Busan on Monday. Temperature-wise, those two cities start at 22 and 23 respectively, Seoul at 22. The mercury will rise to 29 in the capital and 27 in both Daegu and the port city. And now let's check out the weather conditions in your neck of the woods and around the world. And that wraps up our newscast. As Saint Teresa would say, do ordinary things with extraordinary love if you dread the monotony of your daily lives. Thanks for watching.